Welcome to Peoples and Things, where we explore human life with technology. I'm Lee Vinsel. Hype! Oh, hype! Hype! Beautiful, beautiful hype. The inflated, unrealistic narratives and expectations of near-term technological change and the shifts in society that are supposedly going to arrive from it. Hype! You know, it was about 5 or 6 years ago that I got seriously interested in what we might think of as hype studies. There were a lot of reasons for my interests. Part of it was the topic played some role in the book I wrote with Andy Russell, The Innovation Delusion. And also, we just clearly were in a technology bubble at the time, including shit like the sharing economy, blockchain, Web 3.0, and the metaverse. Do you remember that bullshit? And delivery drones and so much more. I mean, we could just list for days all the nonsense. And we're in a bubble today too, though it's a different bubble, the generative AI bubble. And my question at the time was, how do you study hype in bubbles? One text I've found super helpful over the years and that we had on the show earlier was Brent Goldfarb's and David Kirsch's Bubbles and Crashes, the Boom and Bust of Technological Innovation. Learned a lot from that book, highly recommend it. And another person I've learned so much from is today's guest, Jeffrey Lee Funk, a retired professor, a consultant, a Discovery Institute fellow, and the winner of the NTT DoCoMo Mobile Science Award. Jeff's a very creative thinker in hype studies, especially when it comes to methodology, thinking about how we can go about studying hype in technology markets. He pushes us to look at fundamental questions about markets, including things like market sizes, revenues, accumulated debt, profitability, a whole bunch of basic questions about technology markets that many people fail to ask. Indeed, in subfields like science and technology studies, people don't even know how to ask them because we do not train them to do so. So we end up with a kind of idiocracy on our hands where people desire to talk about and criticize new technologies without knowing much at all about the markets that are producing them. It's a totally bonkers situation. I've learned so much from Jeff, and I've wanted to have him on for such a long time. And recently, I finally found a good excuse to bring him on when he published his book, Unicorns, Hype, and Bubbles, a guide to spotting, avoiding, and exploiting investment bubbles in tech, which I think is a very helpful synthetic book to have on hand, even if you're more interested in the humanistic and social scientific study of technology markets than you are in investment. Jeff has so much to teach us, and he's so often a unique and refreshing voice on the topic of hype and technology markets, which is why I say to you, hey, get excited! Jeff, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
My pleasure.
So, Unicorn Hypes and Bubbles is a cool book, and I'm so glad to see it coming out. I think this is a book we've needed for years. When you explain it to a stranger, what do you say it's about? What were you trying to do with it?
Well, it's about an aspect of tech that has become all too common in the last decade. Technologies that never really diffuse that rapidly, never really add that much value. About startups that are mostly unprofitable. We've heard of some of them, and they get a lot of attention. But you've got more than 1,000 unicorns, startups valued at $1 billion before they went public. So it's about these kinds of issues and about the hype. I mean, there's incredible hype. I mean, the way entrepreneurs, founders, VCs make money now is they hype something way up and get a big valuation, and then they can cash out. And 40 years ago, it was about developing a good product, improving it, getting customers, then being profitable, then going public, then changing the world. And all that stuff is kind of ignored today. And so I think it's important that we talk about this from a number of perspectives. One would be, why aren't things going well, which is, I think, really important question. Uh, Another is, how do you deal with this as an investor? So if you look at my book, you think it's an investment guide, and it's not really, because don't really write those kinds of books. But you see, in
Yeah.
today's world, publishers, there's either academic publishers where you can address any kind of issue you want, but if the academics won't review it, then you're not going to get it published. So then you got to go to practitioners, and practitioners say, "There, we want a how-to book. You got to tell us how to do things."
Right,
Okay.
right, right, right.
So it's hard. I mean, people for years were telling me, "Why don't you just tell us about some of your successful clients?" And I'd say, there's hardly any successful startups. This isn't like there's all these gems out there that we got to find. It's about that they're not doing well. And so then how do you present that as a how-to book? Well, how to avoid problems with investing in these companies.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a real issue, right? And you also give, advice to managers about how to position companies and think about markets. And there's a number of different angles of how to that you actually explore in this. So how did you come to write this book? I mean, one road into that question might be, you talk about how for most of your life you were kind of, or much of your life anyway, you were a kind of techno optimist, but then something shifted. So tell us a bit about that, and like why you decided to write this
Yeah,
book.
most of my life I've been an optimist. I mean, I was 13 when we landed on the moon in 1969. I then majored in physics. I mean, this was really exciting. I saw all these things as exciting. And for years I did. I mean, I worked in a semiconductor company, got a PhD in engineering. I spent years being an optimist. When things started to change was I was teaching this course in economics and new technologies at NUS, National University of Singapore. And about 2013, I began to notice that things like nanotechnology and superconductors for energy, they weren't getting better. Right? If something's
Yeah.
not being used, the only way it's gonna see in the future is if it gets better, and usually it's a lot better. And there's a lot of examples of those technologies, but I was finding that a lot of the technologies that were being hyped at the time weren't getting better. So that was the first sign that something's really not working right here. Um, and then there was the startup losses. So I started to notice this. I had so many students. I had 50 group projects a year done on
Wow.
different technologies, different businesses. And so I was getting a lot. I mean, people were talking about a lot of
Yeah.
things that I wasn't going to find on my own. And they started to tell me about ride sharing, for example. And I realized back in 2014, they're not sharing a ride with anybody. They're sharing a ride with a driver. It's a taxi service. And I began to see this, and I began to see, okay, things aren't going that well. And things got worse. By 2018, I had gone through and looked for profitability data in all the startups. And I realized most weren't profitable. I thought it was a big deal. I thought everybody would be interested. If you're going
Yeah.
to teach entrepreneurship, don't you want to tell your students what works, what doesn't? Nobody
Yeah.
cared. Still, I mean, if you look for information on profitability of startups, there's almost none there. It's all me, Gary Smith, my sometimes co-author, and and Lee, we've written an article on this. And then Jay Ritter at the University of Florida writes about how the percentage of startups at IPO time uh, that are profitable has gone down dramatically over the last 40 years. So there's a few people. So the road to this conclusion has been very long, and I could have written this book 3 years ago, but it's hard to say things pessimistic now. There's just so much hype, and business professors are some of the worst.
Oh, totally.
Yes, it's
Some of my
amazing to
good
me.
friends are business professors. It really is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, how that world feeds into it
Contrast
so
that with the
often.
'80s when Japan was challenging America. Harvard Business School was filled with people talking about this problem. There was Managing Rate Economic Decline in 1980. Very good article. There was a lot of good articles. There was a lot of professors who were really thinking about these things. very carefully. But now, how many are there? There's some, but most of the famous professors are very optimistic. I mean, Tyler Cohen, who wrote a pessimistic book 15 years ago, his blog is very optimistic, and he just makes fun of anybody who says, well, there are problems with some of these large language models.
Or Ethan Mollick, to give another
Oh,
example
he's
of,
even
these
worse.
guys.
Right.
Yeah. Or Brynjolfsson is back.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah. Um, so just give kind of listeners like a little taste of how you think about these things. Where are you at? I mean, we're going to go back to your book in a second, but where are you at right now with like the generative AI bubble? Like, how are you thinking about generative AI? Um, yeah, I mean, like, where do you think things are at with it?
Well, I spend a lot of my time looking at for success stories, and so the book has it. I mean, there are some. I'm more optimistic about generative AI for images. I mean, you have to realize, what does generative do? It generates text. It generates images. Some of that can be used as video. Now, what are the industries that use that? Well, it's probably not going to help that much to make cars, to construct houses, to make anything in factories. It's probably not going to help that in healthcare, right? But it can probably help us write books. Probably not the best ones, right? Writing a successful book is very hard, and it takes a lot of human thought. So I don't think generative AI is going to do that.
Yeah.
But for helping to make movies, I mean, I have followed movie making for a long time, partly because my son, he's into programming, he's into movie making. So we watched a lot of videos on how you make movies and all the tricks they use in terms of uh, set design and things, and the angle of the shot and everything, but also in terms of
Yeah.
programming. They're going to add this in, and it's going to happen not overnight. It's not like there's going to be the most successful movies get made from AI for a very long time, but they will use some AI. So that's where I'm kind of optimistic. Maybe some in what's Klarna using it for? Uh, these call centers. Okay, specialized call centers, because they can't answer everything, but you can train it on a very limited set of data, and then it will do well. So call centers, um, in translation, right? There's a lot of translation, transcription, a lot of these things that it can do. So these things will happen. It's just that you have to be careful when you jump from those to the whole world, right? People look at, for example, how the resolution of the videos created by generative AI and talk about how great they are. Well, this is partly why I'm optimistic about them being used in the production of movies. But that doesn't mean they're going to be used for everything, right? They look at the improvements. You have to be very careful about what improvements you're talking about. And so I spend a lot of time in my book doing this, because it's something I've done in research for 15 years. This is what I have been arguing for a long time is key. You got to understand the improvements, and what specifically are they? So in generative AI, it's mostly about resolution and things like that. It's not about reducing the number of hallucinations, right? That's the limitation. So for a lot of applications, it's that they hallucinate, and some people say bullshit. So they don't say correct things. Now, if we want them to be used more, we need to reduce those hallucinations, the frequency of hallucinations. And so far, I can't really see that. I see that they get better at answering questions about standard tests, but that's mostly because they've been trained on the standard test. When you give them something new, they can't reason and they fail. So, but I'm looking for, can we get an improvement there? Because that's a key question. And so far, I'm pessimistic, but something may happen.
Yeah, I mean, the other angle that you bring in with so many of the technologies you examine is profitability, right? I mean, right now they're just burning crap cash like crazy. And it's unclear how OpenAI would become profitable in the near term.
Well, yeah, it's again getting back to the use cases. How many people want to use it, and you think about how they're going to make money. And one of the one of the ways, of course, is some consumer service. But there isn't a lot of consumers that want to. There may also be individual corporate users who want to use it. There may be companies that want to license it to use it to train uh, their own system on their process data. So there, I see, I'm a little more optimistic. I see one of the mistakes that Ethan Mollick and other advocates of large language models make is they think that it's all about individual productivity. I'll tell you, there's a long literature going back on this that I have dealt with for years because it's about processes. That's what just-in-time
Yeah, right,
manufacturing
right,
is about.
right.
Process is about improving the way the whole factory works, not about how one worker can make their machine run like crazy and they make a stack of parts next to the machine and wow, I'm so productive, right? So
Oh, that's
people
interesting. Yeah.
realize that this was a mistake. No, we don't
Yeah.
need lots of parts being made. We need the cycle time from when parts arrive at the factory to when products are shipped out there. We want to reduce that cycle time. We want to reduce all the inventory in there, partly because doing that allows faster feedback on quality so that we can fix quality problems very fast. Workers in an upstream process understand what workers in the downstream process needs. This is important. So it isn't individual productivity, it's the factory productivity. And, you know, there were people who looked at product development, looked at how workers do things concurrently, overlapping work. So again, it wasn't individual productivity. The Japanese were the first to do this. Then there was a book called Reengineering the Corporation. It was very popular about 30 years ago by James Champion, Michael Hammer. Again, the same argument. Think about processes. So we know this, right? We know that we
Yeah.
want to think about processes. But here there are these proponents of LLMs who just talk about what you want to do is you want to get the LLM and you want to see how it can change your work. And I'll tell you
Yeah.
what's
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
happen by the smart people who do this. They're going to be pumping out that email, pumping out those papers, making all kinds of work for everybody else. And system productivity is going down. So there's other people have
That's nice.
talked about this. It's a bureaucrat's dream, right? It's going to make work
Oh, interesting.
unless it's done in the right way. We got to do it in the right way. We have to focus on process, get companies to do this, and there's some that are doing this. And so I'm optimistic that somebody will figure it out. The problem is it's hard for companies to figure out when there is so much noise, so much hype about how, oh, this is so fantastic, it's going to change everything.
Yeah. 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 So let's get into the book. I mean, you talk about bubbles in the first part. And what do you think? You do a really nice job kind of looking at bubbles before versus bubble, like the bubble of the last decade, the bubble that's like kind of came to something of an end in 2022 to 2023. What do you think has driven the growth of the tech bubble that ended at that period, and why is that bubble, like, different in various ways from bubbles that came in earlier
Well, a lot of
decades,
it
do you
is
think?
easy money. I mean, there's so much easy money over the last 15 years. Ever since the Great Recession of 2008, there's the quantitative easing, the lower interest rates. I mean, the interest rates. Um, people who don't have know much history kind of think that they're really high now, but they're not when you compare it to 20 years ago. They're very low, and all those low interest rates have enabled companies to invest a lot more, VCs to get money, invest a lot more. They can
Yeah.
service their debt. Debt isn't as big a problem. It's allowed people to buy houses, to buy stock, right? So the run
Yeah.
up in housing prices, a lot of low interest rates, low, easy money. And so now people, so just an aside, all these rich people decided, okay, we're going to buy houses, try to get rid of your rent from us because it's cheap to buy them. And so there's a lot of bad outcomes from these low interest rates and quantitative easing. I'm talking indirectly about I talk about bubbles, startup bubbles. So you know, um, technology bubbles. There's been so many in the last 10 years. I mean, people kind of forget all this stuff about this startup VinFast, this Vietnamese electric vehicle supplier. It was briefly one of the most valuable automobile companies in the world. There was a superconducting bubble of last summer, right, where
Yeah.
suddenly it was like, "Oh, this is gonna change everything." These things just come and go. It's become the mode by which a lot of people work. They work in bubbles. They're just trying to get attention. right? Somebody wrote about the attention economy internet. Well, attention economy gets a lot of money to go to your stock, and your stock goes up and you sell, and you're a billionaire, and you've never produced anything socially of value. That's our economy.
Yeah, I mean, you call these micro bubbles, right? Is
Micro
that your
bubbles, yeah.
term for these? Yeah, and so the idea is like when we had the .com um, bubble and then the .com bust. I mean, that was a large bubble, and but you're saying like it's become more kind of diffuse now, where there's just like these small bubbles that pop up here and there over time, right? It could be like GameStop or whatever. Um, and you make another kind of fascinating argument of that kind of fits with this. It's a little different, but it fits in the same space, I think, which is that when we think of the .com bust of like, I think it starts in 2000 and goes to 2002, if I remember those dates correctly. You're looking at like NASDAQ, right? Is like the stock market, the NASDAQ really drops during over that 2-year period. But that's not really how a good way to think about the bubble of the last decade, because as you point out, NASDAQ is a measure of incumbents. So it's large companies that have kind of made it and they've gotten onto the stock market versus so many of the companies that have suffered in the last decade or so are really startups, right? So how do we think about that then?
Well, you're right. The dot-com bubble and today's bubble is mostly about incumbents. The dot-com bubble is about Cisco and Qualcomm and Intel,
Yeah.
Nokia. Nokia.
Right.
And today's, of course, is about all these big incumbents. Now, there was a lot of startups 20 years ago that ended up changing the world. I mean, Amazon and Google and a lot of these companies in the late 1990s that ended up doing very well. Even Yahoo's temporarily very successful on eBay. And today, well, there's OpenAI, there's Uber, there's Airbnb, there's a few, but it's mostly the incumbents. So there's some similarities and differences.
Hmm. Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned this earlier, but you kind of draw it out in the kind of the chapters in part one, where you say when you go back and look at like news articles about kind of bubbly technologies in the 80s and 90s, you see a lot of reporting, even in like computer magazines, which are full of hype, right? I mean, it always have been, but they were reporting on profits.
Yeah, they did.
That was like a question
Yeah.
people were asking a lot, and that just kind of falls off. So have you thought about like what's going on there? I mean, I don't know. I had a number of theories came to my mind, but I just wondered what you thought of.
So a big issue in bubbles is narratives and who drives the narratives. And this is a big part of Robert Schiller's, Nobel laureate Robert Schiller, research on bubbles. There's a narrative that drives the creation of the bubble, and then it drives the bubble when it goes down. And so who's driving the bubbles? Well, who's driving the bubbles is usually the tech sector. Now, it used to be that people push back against optimistic bubbles. Even Alan Greenspan talked about irrational exuberance. He said, there's too much hype in the stock market right now. That's not happening
Yeah.
now from the Federal Reserve. They don't care. They never mention that.
Right. Yeah.
There was also professors, 25 years ago who talked about there was too much. But see, that's kind of gone. The narratives, there's a lot of people who are exploiting these narratives. It's not just the tech sector. It's not just startups, founders, big tech companies. It's consulting
Yeah.
companies. I mean, a lot of the hype is being driven by McKinsey and these types of companies who are making incredible amounts. They have been making incredible amounts for a very long time. They started a lot of the hype, 7, 8 years ago by saying that AI would be worth 16 trillion by 2030. It's not going to happen. And yet here they are again, generative AI is going to be so great.
Oh my God.
And so,
It's amazing. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
so they've been pushing the hype. Professors have been pushing the hype. A lot of professors. I mean, look at all these universities who are benefiting from offering executive courses on AI, blockchain. There's a long list,
Yeah.
right? They've been doing this for a
Yeah.
long
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
and they'll keep doing it. And so to them, they have a reason not to be objective. They have a big reason.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and it makes me think about just the role of media too, and the role of clicks and kind of incentives that journalists have to go along with the hype wave these days. But the other thing I was thinking about as you were
Can
talking
I
me through
jump
this
in
is
there for a
just
second?
yeah,
Very important
yeah,
about
sure,
journalism and media, something that's changed. See, it used to be that the media was, a few big television news stations, weekly magazines, newspapers, who were all very concerned about their reputation of being objective because that's how you got subscribers. That's how you made money. Well, it's kind of gone away. People just want free news. So how are they going to make money? Very simple. They charge the writers of the stories. They charge these companies. So there's all these companies who are spending immense amount of money getting their articles published on these websites. And they're also paying influencers. I mean, there's a lot of influencers out there on social media. I get offered money once in a while. I tell them, why would I want to hype your product for a few $1,000s? And this happened most recently, just 2 months ago. Why would I want to do
wow,
that when my whole audience wants me to be objective? I mean, I can't do
yeah,
that, but I'll tell you, a lot of people can. And you look on LinkedIn, you look at who has the most subscribers and who's saying the most optimistic things on about AI. I can't mention any names, but those people are definitely getting paid. They're making good
wow,
money. Don't doubt it. Right? This is the biggest change in the media that this is going on. And the media should write about this. You find out exactly how much money is being spent here.
that's fascinating. Um, the other thing that I was thinking about is just the role that so Amazon was unprofitable for 10 years. Is that right?
Yeah,
Is it
they
was
were
it in it?
they became profitable in their 10th year.
I feel like it's like the myth of Amazon also drives like a lot of this. It's like every company is going to be something like Amazon, which is clearly not true. But like when you bring up profitability, so often it's like, well, Amazon was
Yeah,
unprofitable for
yeah.
10 years,
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Yeah, I know. Somebody once told me to walk on water. I said I can't do it. And they said, "Well, Jesus did it." All you got to do is find one historical example and suddenly anybody can do it. You can't
Yeah, yeah,
run 100 meters in less than 10 seconds. Usain Bolt does it. Why can't you? I mean, obviously it's a ridiculous argument.
yeah. So part of your argument, it comes out in part two of your book and other places, is that along around all these super hype techno companies like ride hailing companies, and you have lots of other examples. There's just like a fundamental misunderstanding of the business realities these companies were facing. So why don't you spin that out for us? I mean, talk about ride hailing and how people just misunderstand like the possibilities here, whether it's market size or productivity or any of these other kind of fundamental
Well, I make the
measures that we
argument
use.
that to really be profitable without just kind of trying to screw your workers is you have to be more productive than the competitors. So you have to be more productive. So I talk about a lot about that, about, I call them the low tech startups like Uber and these others, that, they're not really that much more productive than the competitors. Uber, it automated the what do you call it? The call in person, you don't have to call in someone to get a taxi. Um, anymore. So I spend a lot of time going over that, a lot of businesses, about how they're really not more productive. And a lot of times the founders aren't dealing with the important issues in the business, partly because a lot of these businesses are regulated. I mean, healthcare, you're not going to make healthcare better until you deal with all the insurance companies and all of these issues that are really complicated, right? This isn't something simple that one startup is going to solve this. Um, and then that's kind of in part two, I guess. Part three deals with the technology kind of heavy industries, which really is where the most profitable startups in our history have come from. I mean,
Yeah.
that's why Silicon Valley that's where it got its name, from the silicon of semiconductors. So semiconductors are an important part of Silicon Valley. Later, computers, hardware, software, networking, finally the internet of, fiber optics and things like that. So there was a lot of science-based technologies that played a big role. And there, what I argue that is kind of hasn't been going on is, again, there's too much hype, and so the companies end up focusing on the mass market. They keep thinking, "Oh, we're ready for the iPhone moment and the virtual reality and augmented reality and delivery drones," and as opposed to find a niche, find those first customers, the people who are willing to pay the most, willing to put up with the worst performance. Find those first customers, the second customers, the third customers. But we don't get that. We get this hype about, no, 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 it's right around the corner of the mass market. We're going to have EVTOLs all over the place. Find those first customers, the second customers. Academics are almost as bad. They have this term, general purpose technology. It's a great term for what you're talking when you're talking about something that's already happened. But now you have these people saying, well, this is a general purpose technology, so it's going to take a
Yeah,
while.
yeah,
But once
yeah.
it happens, everything's going to take off. Wait a minute.
Right,
Where's
right,
the
right.
first customer, second customer? So these are very fundamental business skills that people used to have. Business skills used to push, and now they're not.
Well, I mean, I think, in some of our previous conversations, you've talked about how, like, a lot of this just came from teaching classes. You kind of mentioned this earlier,
Came from where?
where teaching
Oh,
classes,
yeah.
where you were just teaching like basic market size
Yeah.
analysis and profitability and all these kind of things that are just like taken, like you took to be like the most basic things, and yet you were finding them like not reflected in the thinking about businesses. Is
Yeah.
that fair?
Yes, very much so. And where this comes from, it comes from the obsession with publishing papers, No, and the only way you can teach is you have to publish lots of papers. And so what do you do when you teach? Well, you go look for the papers that have been published, and then you teach them in the class. There's no kind of thinking about, well, what's fundamentally important to a business? Well, people talked about this 40, 50 years ago, and so I'm going to talk about it. No, it's forgotten because it's not in the literature now. Right? You have to realize how much time professors spend reading academic papers. And why are they reading academic papers? Because they have to cite them in order to get published. They're not reading them to understand them. They're reading them so
Yeah,
that they can
yeah.
cite them so they can get published. That's the whole game. There's no concern about, I want to really understand this. I want to be really teach this. That's all out the window. It's all, I got to get published.
Well, you talk about this book that I had not heard before, about before, The Knowledge Illusion by Sloman and Fernbach. It looks like a cool book, and one of the things you have this nice little part in the book where you summarize some of the things they talk about, and it was along the lines of what you're talking about right now. It's that people in publications and other places are much better at talking about the conclusions the authors of a paper have reached, because that, frankly, that's in the abstract. Let's be real. And they're not, they don't really understand the evidence and how the inferences are made and all that kind of kind of nitty gritty detail work. Right. I thought that was like a wonderful, fascinating, yeah, finding.
Yeah. Well,
And I'm reproducing it because I'm just repeating a conclusion without understanding the empirics, but still.
well, you're acknowledging it. I mean, this thing that people have gotten, the whole discourse has become more superficial. So that's a big argument in the book. I mostly kind of talk about it in the end, which is where you're referring to that book. And so there's other books have said this. We've all gotten more superficial. We think we understand things when we don't. Uh, we don't have critical thinking. So there's a whole set of basic skills that people have been talking about their decline for 20, 30 years. And now
Yeah.
we can see the impact of it. We can see the impact of it by having all these uh, founders and VCs and other things who really are nowhere near as smart as the ones who were 40, 50 years ago. What they're good is bullshitting. And, there's even some academic research I cite that finds this. So it's a sad thing. What it means is that it's very hard to solve the problem. It's very hard to solve the problem because we really have to change the people.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I want to ask you, one of the things you bring up. You talk about Robert Gordon's work at several points in the book, and I'm talking about the rise and fall of American growth, And this kind of finding that he and others have had, that, that productivity gains have decreased over since the 70s, basically. And you have this brief period in the 90s, like 94 to 2004, when it goes back up. It doesn't get back up to where it was before 1970, but it's pretty significant gains there. And then it comes down, and it's been low basic pretty much to the present. And so I just wondered, like, I mean, I think part of your answer we're already touching on is how academia has changed and how it's working differently, and that means we're producing different kinds of science. But I just wanted to kind of get you on the record, like, what do you think, from your perspective, is driving that shift? So that we're kind of not getting the gains from technologies that we once got, that we were getting
Well, the
earlier.
book mostly focuses on the tech sector, startups, founders, all the decisions they're making. Um, but a paper we co-authored a couple years ago deals with the changes in basic and applied research over the past 70 years, and they've been significant. And, we had, back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, we had so many of these science-based technologies coming out of basic research. And we have less now. And, there used to be corporations that did a lot of this. Why they don't do it now is a complicated story. It's all driven by universities, and there's been this, you know, several orders of magnitude increase in papers published. We just got so many papers
Yeah.
now, so many papers, and yet we're measuring people by how many papers they publish. And what we really want is ideas, and nobody can think about ideas. And we've got so many journals, and they're all hyper specialized. And uh, then we've got the whole bureaucracy that professors deal with. I mean, if you read some of the books about Bell Labs in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, these people were spending all their time thinking. Nowadays, the top researchers, they're not scientists, they're bureaucrats. They're managing a big lab. They're producing many, many papers, often with 100 authors each. They've got all of these PhD students, all these postdoc students who are helping them write their papers. And they have to write letters of recommendation and help them find jobs, and on and on and on. This is a lot of work, and if you're a nice guy, you don't have any time to be a real scientist. But look back at what these Bell Lab scientists do. They were thinking, and, develop something really new requires a lot of thought. And, a lot of the Nobel laureates say the same thing. They said, I would have never gotten the Nobel laureate. I wouldn't even succeed now because I don't have enough papers published. And of course, Catalin Carico is just a good example of how the system doesn't work. While she's thinking and working on a fundamental new idea, she's being criticized because she doesn't have enough money and enough publications.
Wow. Yeah, and like along with that, you talk about like the kind of like bad metrics, like publications and these other kinds of things that we've glommed onto, which just kind of incentivize this behavior.
Yeah, yeah, there are very bad metrics, and it's all over the economy. We have these bad metrics. It's very narrow metrics, so it's not just in academia, it's in business. Uh, and there's a whole set of people who that is their life, managing these metrics.
Yeah, yeah.
There's The Tyranny of Metrics, a great book from 25 years ago. 25 years ago. There's a book, Bullshit Jobs, where a lot of the jobs are, some of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are managing these metrics. And we've created so many jobs for people who manage metrics. And anybody who has a child in school has to deal with this every day. I mean, my son is dealing with it all the time. These crazy metrics about how well he does, filling in the blanks on some exam. This is not going to produce the kind of people we want in the future and deal with the issues we're talking about right now. And so this metric issue, it affects every aspect of our life.
I wanted to double back for a second and talk for a sec about kind of the new technologies and the economics of new technologies. So part of it has to do with in your analysis, the importance of market sizes and how many adopters you have and this kind of thing. And I was going to ask you, like, do you think market sizes for new technologies have gotten smaller necessarily? But the other thing I wanted to ask you is, you had this really nice analysis of how things like the iPhone involved, words are escaping me here, but like bringing in like quickly changing technologies into a kind of package with a lot of other incremental. You point out really beautifully how so many things associated with Apple weren't that novel, including the App Store wasn't that novel really. But they did, package all these kind of incrementally changing things around quickly changing things as well. So I wanted to just hear you talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, Apple's obviously very good at handling these things. And Steve Jobs, Wozniak, they've been doing it. But second of all, this notion of rapidly improving technologies, as I said, if a technology isn't selling, it's only going to sell in the future if it gets better. It really helps if it gets a lot better. And what we find from a lot of the last 50 years is rapidly improving technologies, through a lot through making transistors smaller and using new materials in lasers and batteries and other things. Uh, in the past, a lot of, if you look back 150 years back to Gordon's book, steel and stuff was about scaling up, and uh, there was these old rules I learned 25 years ago, but I guarantee you nobody learned, or 45 years ago, people don't learn now. It's about how you increase the radius of something, and that makes the volume go up much faster than the surface area. And surface area is cost, and volume is output. So you get more, you get really rapidly falling costs. So these kinds of things aren't talked about anymore. It's all general purpose technology, something very, very superficial, right? Because it seems that a lot of companies don't want to talk about the details, and yet that's where the understanding comes from. So I deal with these rapidly improving technologies in one of the chapters on the iPhone, and that the whole uh what the Apple App Store, right? If you want to have an app store and you want to have people downloading apps, you have to have enough storage, memory storage on the phone to store all those apps. In addition to all the pictures you want to store, the music you want to store. So there was, right when the iPhone came out, 2008, the rapid improvements in transistors and in really integrated circuits enabled a lot more uh, apps to be stored. It kind of crossed the threshold at which enough could be stored that people could do that. So that's an important part of the iPhone story. It's an important part of technology change, is understanding when technologies are good enough. And I don't see people with those skills anymore. I just see people saying, "Oh, everything improves." And partly that comes from people who think that it's all from volume. It's from design changes, not volume. I mean, volumes have an impact, but you got to change the designs too. Um, so there's a lot there, and I have a feeling that the business professors won't like it because it goes into stuff they don't know, and they don't want to hear about that, and they want to hear it's about the technology and understanding the technology. They want to hear about, oh, it's a business model.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me, I mean, I was around the economist Stephen Klepper at Carnegie Mellon. I think he got to Carnegie Mellon after you were there. I didn't even realize we had this Carnegie Mellon connection. That's where I got my PhD too. But, he had this book, and what is he? I think he calls it like nano economics or something like that. And it's all about like how we really have to understand the economics of technology. You really have to understand those nitty gritty changes and how they happen to understand how the business model even becomes possible, ultimately, right? So I was thinking about that when I was reading these sections of yours. Um,
Yeah, Steve Klepper was
the
brilliant. He was on my committee a long time
Oh, was
ago.
he? He
Yeah,
was there.
yeah, he was there.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
he was brilliant, and it was very unfortunate that he died, because he died before he was able to publish everything, because he was all in the details and he didn't have time to step back and think about what those details meant for economic theory. Because if he had, I'll tell you, he would have produced some great books. He was a brilliant man. I mean, he talked about things that nobody really nobody else talked about.
Yeah. No, he was a really original thinker, truly. I was at the memorial gathering there at Carnegie Mellon for him, and my doctoral advisor, David Hounshell, was one of the editors of that experimental capitalism book that he didn't finish, but they published it
I have to turn the
posthumously.
power on.
Sure.
Okay, my computer was ready to go turn off.
Go down.
Okay.
Um. So the conclusion of your book is called "What Should We Do?" So, I mean, what do you want readers to take away from this book, and where do you think we need to go in the future with things?
Well, I want readers to think more about the details of technology and what determines whether or not it's going to diffuse, and whether lots of startups going to be able to make money. Uh, so I want them to deal with those issues. There's some broader set issue of what we should do, how we fix it. I mean, that's not really addressed in the book because it's a how-to book. I mean, I wanted to write a book like that, but I'm not going to be able to write a book with that unless somebody famous writes I have a famous co-author, because it's too hard. It's because most professors aren't going to admit there's been a slowdown. Until they admit there's a slowdown, how can you have a book talking about how to fix things? I mean, Robert Gordon didn't even succeed, right? He writes this tremendous book, and yet people ignore him. They gave the Nobel
Yeah.
Prize to Paul Romer, who had an equation. I was just
Yeah.
like, I'm stunned.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the fact that there's been, that there's some people call it the stagnation thesis and such. Um, I think it's widely accepted in some circles. Like, there's been a whole debate about it in Jacobin, of all places. Like, kind of socialist historians and sociologists and such believe that. I think, but I think if you're talking about business school professors, no. I mean, that's not the message we hear coming out of B schools. That's for sure. Um, yeah. But I mean, I think that I'm kind of with you. I mean, I feel bad about it because it ends up being like an education. We did educate people better, and that's an uncomfortable place for me to land, because that's what we say about so many issues in our society. But like, it really is. I mean, really do believe some level that my life is committed to this. So of course I believe it. It's it's I'm bought in, and I have self interest in saying this, but I really do believe that we need to have better teaching around thinking about these issues. Um, and and then it's not just for people going into business, right? It's not just for entrepreneurship programs, but also just like people who are going to end up in higher education, administration, as an example. They repeat bullshit hype all the time and are not thinking critically about these issues and just go along with trends. So, I think there is really kind of a fundamental educational thing that needs to happen around these topics.
Oh, I agree 100%. It covers a lot of fields. So people tend to think they're an expert at a lot of
Right.
things. They think they're an expert in technology. They think they're an expert in economics, politics, psychology. Almost every
Right.
subject. It's just a few, like physics and biology and chemistry, where people will, oh, okay, they can't.
Well, hey, hold on, maybe not.
Yeah, but a lot of topics.
Yeah.
Let me tell you something I did when was it? 30 years ago. 30 years ago, I told myself I was moving to Japan. Maybe it was 25 years ago, 30 years. I was moving to Japan. And I said, I'm going to stop giving opinions on a whole set of issues because I'm not sure about them. But up until then, I had to say those things because all my friends said those things. And if I
Yeah.
suddenly said, well, I'm not sure, they would get mad at me. So I think that a lot of people, there's a lot of social pressure to say you know when you don't know. And people really have to be braver. They have to say, wait a minute, I don't know. Here's what I know, here's what I don't know. Or here's what I know, and here's things that I know a little, and here's things I don't know at all. And be willing to say, I don't know, and I'm going to think about it. And I don't have an opinion. But people have a hard time doing that.
Boy, they sure do. Well, Jeff, it's been fun chatting with you. I'm so glad you're out there doing this work. I mean, I can't remember how I stumbled upon you back in the day, but I mean, you're just kind of a unique voice out there. And I think you're a really creative analyst of hype and technology bubbles. And what I most like about your work is how you find cool ways to measure, like, for instance, just like all the attention you pay to cumulative losses, which are huge at these companies, because no one talks about them, but you've done all this work kind of like recombining them. So I'm really glad you're out there, and I really love your work. So
Thank you.
thanks so much for coming on, man.
My pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of our podcast. You can reach us with questions, comments, and suggestions at leevinsel@gmail.com or by following me on Twitter at STS_news or on YouTube at People's Things. Our podcast is distributed by the New Books Network, the leading platform for academic podcasts, so that you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Peoples and Things, like most things in this world, depends on the work of many people. I want to thank my brother Jake Vinsel for writing the music for the show. I want to thank my buddy Juliana Castro for designing the logos for the podcast. You can check out her work at julianacastro.co. Joe Fort is the producer for the podcast, and Mandy Lamb is the production assistant. This podcast and other Peoples and Things programming are produced in affiliation with Virginia Tech Publishing and supported by the Center for Humanities and the University Libraries at Virginia Tech. For information about other podcasts from Virginia Tech Publishing, visit publishing.vt.edu. For the entire Peoples and Things team, I am Lee Vinsel. And most importantly, I want to thank you for listening. Thanks.